Pearl Marley is an animal and environmental advocate and documentary filmmaker. She graduated from UNCW with her Master of Fine Arts in Filmmaking in May of 2023, with Sentient Souvenirs serving as her thesis film. When she is not filming, Pearl enjoys nature photography, reading, quilting, playing her guitar, and spending time with her cat Oliver. Sentient Souvenirs was born from her love of film, 6 years of experience in the pet industry, and a move to the coastal town of Wilmington, North Carolina. Please welcome Pearl Marley.
These are purple pincher hermit crabs. They're a staple in coastal gift shops, beach stores, and pet stores around the world. To most people, they're throwaway pets or short-term entertainment for children on vacation. But there's so much more. My name is Pearl Marley, and I'm an animal lover and advocacy documentary filmmaker who's on a mission to discover more about these complex creatures and why they're so widely exploited and misunderstood. It all started here, a chain beach store dripping with bright colors and packed full of cheap clothes and trinkets. As I walked through the back, I realized some of those trinkets were actually live. Hundreds of hermit crabs in colorful shells were crammed into an open enclosure and climbing over each other towards a single heat source. Most of the crabs were small, no more than a few years old, but some of the jumbo hermit crabs were much larger. These crabs were more likely over the age of 5, and this is how their life is going to end. I also noticed the stores were marketing hermit crabs as a no-loss situation for buying customers. Some of the stores even had them out front, a big flashing sign that said, "Free hermit crab with purchase of a cage." This really stood out to me. If you buy a cage for $16.99, you get the living thing for free, quote unquote. The stores know that if someone gets this for their child, the crab is going to eventually die. It's not a big loss because you still have the wire or plastic tub. You can just buy another one for $5.99 or $10.99. Perpetuating that cycle of harmful consumerism is incredibly sad. But I wanted to know, where do they come from? And how do they get here? Contrary to popular belief, hermit crabs don't live on the open beach. They live here, in the trees and undergrowth behind the open sand.
There are over 800 species of hermit crabs, and only some of them are land crabs. In fact, very few species actually live on land. The species that you're talking about, which is Cenobita clypeatus, is found in the Caribbean through Florida, Gulf of Mexico, probably all the way down to nearly the Amazon. The land hermit crab, which in Bermuda is a very interesting story because the animals there aren't many of them, and their ability to survive is very much dependent on the availability of seashells that they use as shelters. And the one that they grow into as they get older, the most common one, that snail isn't found in Bermuda, it's too far north. But it was there in the Pleistocene, and the shells come out of Pleistocene rocks as fossils. So the hermit crabs there use the shells that are eroding out of the sediment as their homes. Otherwise, they die when they reach a certain size because they can't find a house.
Around the year 2016, animal rights group PETA released a 2.5-minute expose video detailing the horrific conditions of a hermit crab supplier in Orlando, Florida, called Braylon. I spoke with animal activist and former PETA employee Laura Lee Casada about her views on the video.
I actually worked at PETA during that time, and I actually worked on this investigation. I was the evidence analyst, you really don't see a lot of what happens from them being caught to ending up on the tourist store shelves. So this investigation really gave people a look into sort of the middle of that process. I remember we got thousands and thousands of signatures on our petition to get PetSmart to stop selling hermit crabs and cut ties with this supplier. So I think it was really one of the first moments that this trade, which is, millions of hermit crabs every year, but is just sort of overlooked, really got spotlighted in front of so many people, and I think was really a turning point.
The Braylon Corporation was founded in 1990 in Orlando, Florida. It is registered as a non-durable goods wholesale merchant. This means that they do not have to be regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Non-durable goods include paper, chemical, and petroleum products, as well as textiles and alcoholic beverages, to name a few. The company is not accredited by the Better Business Bureau. Any lawsuits or other information regarding the company's treatment of their animals, besides PETA's video, is unavailable. A Google search of the company's given address reveals what appears to be a warehouse that specializes in granite, cabinets, kitchen, and bath. Another address, given by the Better Business Bureau, reveals nothing more than a private residence. With all the trauma that hermit crabs go through during the distribution process, I wondered, does this do more than stress them out? Can hermit crabs actually feel pain?
I've been keeping tabs on research for years. Although the studies maybe are unethical when they're conducted, they definitely have shed light on the ability of crabs to feel pain. One example is that crabs will sort of nurse at wounds when they're inflicted. Hermit crabs tend to really cling to their shells and refuse to give them up because it's their home. But if they're being subjected to painful stimuli, they will actually give up the shell because, it's kind of a trade-off they know that they have to make to avoid the pain. So there's definitely been a huge body of research sort of slowly growing, showing that these animals do feel pain.
If hermit crabs can't feel pain, can we then make the jump and ask, are they sentient?
They're definitely engaging with their environment and thinking, processing. I've believed that for a while after years of observing my crabs once they've been in the proper habitat. Hermit crabs are escape artists. And they have demonstrated a memory that if they find a place in the tank to escape and you catch them and put them back, they will continue to go back to the same place and continue trying to get out. So to me, that's a long-term memory. I had one of my female crabs who was being very ardently pursued by a male, and she just was not into it whatsoever. And he was guarding her and had been guarding her for a couple weeks. I watched her very stealthily change into a new shell without disturbing her old shell and sneak away and go straight to the moss bin and dig down and hide from him. I've seen my crabs come out for the night and go very directly straight to their hamster wheel and get on it and begin walking. Once one of the crabs in the tank knows what the hamster wheel is, they all know how to use it.
The term sentient is pretty vague. Sentient means that the organism responds to sensory inputs. Bacteria do that, plants do that. Every organism that I know of is sentient under that definition. This seems to be a mechanism to try to push the issue of whether people eat lobster or whether they drop them into boiling water or those sorts of things. So on one side is, do you treat organisms with respect?
I do feel that they're sentient. They show preference for shell choice. They inspect, they check. I've had some that seem to have a color preference for shells. The one study that I'm familiar with about sentience was mostly about their shell selection. But really, that's enough for me right there, the fact that they have preferences. I only have one crab that seems to show a preference, and he likes green, and his name is Hermit because of that.
So I am here at an undisclosed pet store that I used to work for at least a year ago now anyway. And we're gonna see if anything's changed and what type of supplies they have to correctly take care of a hermit crab, such as lighting and substrate. We're gonna go in and see. Overall, the designated hermit crab section of the store was very small. But once I started wandering through the reptile and small animal departments, I found a variety of habitats, substrate, lighting, interactive toys, potential treats, and other decor options. I'm in the fish section actually, and I found this. It's so cute. It'd be great for climbing, and it's got a little face on it. That's so cute. Unfortunately, the hermit crabs in the store didn't have quite the quality of enclosure. Having worked in the pet industry, unfortunately, this usually comes down to a lack of training for employees about how to sell and take care of exotic animals, as well as a lack of a store budget. The company usually supplies the store with things they need to take care of the animals, but this usually is spent on small animal food and bedding and medicine, since they're the more popular animals in the store. Hermit crabs usually get the leftovers. This pet store did have a care book about hermit crabs, and it looks like the information is pretty accurate and definitely a lot better of a starting point if you were looking to shop around the store for supplies. It is still a little bit vague, but it's better than nothing. In captivity, the oldest hermit crab on record is Jonathan Livingston Crab. He was purchased by Carol Ann Ormes in 1976, and in the beginning she knew nothing. But she learned from her experiences and started off on her hermit crab journey. Jonathan, unfortunately, passed away in February of 2021. Carol Ann had him for a total of 45 years, but he was more likely older than that, because the majority of hermit crabs being sold commercially are at least a few years old. Jonathan was probably closer to 50 by the time he passed away. This is unheard of in the scientific community, or otherwise, learning about hermit crabs as a species. Science doesn't usually see hermit crabs live this long, and most people don't know that they can live that long. But Carol Ann has proved that they absolutely can.
You can't really make hermit crabs breed. They're only going to do that if they're in good conditions and happy. Saw what I thought was a growth on the side of one of my crabs. The more I looked and the more I studied, I realized it was eggs. The first year didn't work. I didn't have enough time to prepare. I didn't know what I was doing. The next year, I had to wait a whole year, right? The purple pinchers only mate and produce eggs one time a year, usually 2 events, but right back to back. It's usually the full moon in July or August. The first thing that has to happen is the crab has to spawn correctly. I only take eggs that have hatched because they've done the right things. As soon as the eggs hit the salt water, they hatch. So at that point, I have a pool full of, looks sort of like mosquito larvae, little tiny squiggling things. The first thing I do is siphon them all out of that pool, put them in a special tank that I built that's called a chrysal. It mimics the ocean in that it's circular, so there's no dead spots. I feed them right away. That period of time in the chrysal is usually about 3 weeks. And then at that point, they turn into what looks like little tiny lobsters with claws. And then I move them to a different tank that I've made called a transition tank that gives them the opportunity to find and take a shell, put it on, and eventually walk out onto land. So I have to mimic the open ocean in the beginning and then the coastline after they get to where they're almost terrestrial. Should people even have hermit crabs? I think eventually, no. That's probably many years from now. Just because they migrate for miles in the wild, it's very hard to mimic that. Yes, you can give them wheels. It's not the same. It may seem contradictory breeding them and hoping that people will not eventually keep them one day as pets, but I feel very strongly that that's the stepping stone, right? You can't convince people not to have hermit crabs as pets until they start to understand how complicated their lives are. And the way to do that is to have people engage with them as pets, ideally captive bred, so they've never known the wild, so they haven't been taken out of the wild, but eventually with an aim to understand that these creatures are so unique, they're so valuable to the environment in so many ways, and they don't deserve to be kept, even in a really nice enclosure. So this is a really long-term goal. It's complicated. There are ethical concerns that I have every day, but I'm in service of a larger goal, which is keep wild hermit crabs wild.
We reshape our norms around other animals who aren't as familiar to us, like crustaceans. And I think a lot of sea animals kind of fit into that category because they'll live under the water or in places where we don't see them a lot, and they look less familiar to us. They're not cuddly and snuggly, and we sort of anthropomorphize the animals who are snuggly and sort of mold them into what we think are the most sentient types of beings. But I disagree with that. I think that all animals have the capacity to suffer, and so we just haven't gotten to that point yet as a culture to recognize that. If people want to get involved helping animals, I feel like today there are way more resources and tools available than ever before. During beach season, I think it's especially crucial, especially if you live in a beach town, to be out and visible. You can go host demonstrations at stores that are selling them at the beach. You can start your own petition. You can hand out leaflets to people who have bought hermit crabs, kind of giving them information about how to take care of them to hopefully help those crabs live longer. Just little actions like writing a letter to the newspaper add up and make a big difference.
It's about education. I don't blame anyone who started out with no knowledge, because I started out with no knowledge. But the more we can get the knowledge out there, people want to do the right thing. I believe that. They just may not have the information. They may not know yet.
There are so many things that we can do, both large and small, to help hermit crabs. Change takes time, but it all starts when one person decides that enough is enough. Are you that person?